This is a presentation about my career, and I absolutely love talking about this path that I took to get to where I am today. It was definitely the road that I don't think many have traveled. So I love sharing my experiences because I think that it was really quite neat. Can you see the slide advancing? Yep. Awesome, there it goes. Okay, so this was the best job that I never wanted. And I'm not even kidding. I had absolutely no idea that this was a job that was even open to me. I'm 40 years old, or just about to be 40 years old. I started flying when I was 15 through an organization called the Royal Canadian Air Cadets, and I'll talk about that too. But I have done some pretty crazy stuff in my career and in my life, and I had absolutely no idea that this was even possible. So the fact that you're all sitting here already knowing that you might want to do something like this, or at least you're taking the training to do it, is one step ahead of where I was probably when I was your age. One thing that I want to really hammer home is that careers, like runways, are all different. There are no two that are absolutely the same. And the runway here on the left is Accra in Ghana. This is Boinjama, I believe, in the Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire. And there's a little white UN truck in the bottom right of that runway. And if that truck wasn't there, we weren't allowed to land. And this PSP runway, this corrugated metal runway, is in Faizabad, Afghanistan. And we'll talk a little bit about all these places too moving forward. And again, like careers and runways that are all different, so are rope bridges and all the different places that you will have an opportunity to travel in your lifetime. So as I said, I started off in Canada with the Royal Canadian Air Cadets. This is a youth organization that really does promote involvement in aviation. I did not know that this organization existed. I had no idea that teenagers were given glider pilot and private pilot license. And I joined this organization completely on a whim because I had a friend of a friend who was there and I wanted to hang out with them more. And I got into the organization, absolutely fell in love with it. I suspect it would be very similar to your Civil Air Patrol. So there's a lot of, there's uniforms that we have to wear. There's a drill team, there's rifle guard, there's band, there's flying. And so this is a picture of me as the drum major of the band. I played the clarinet for many, many years. And then in my final year, they needed a drum major. And I was apparently the oldest one still there that was crazy enough to do this. So we competed and we took home many awards that year. So it was very, very good, rewarding, terrifying experience. And then when I was 16, I was granted the glider pilot scholarship. So I went away for an entire summer and learned how to be a glider pilot. And then 2 summers later, I was granted my private pilot license. I also did other courses such as survival instructors. And I have some pretty crazy photos of being blindfolded and held around as we did other drill maneuvers, but I think they might have changed the organization a little bit. It was a little bit more military than we had anticipated, I guess, as teenagers. When I was about to be done in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew that I loved flying, and it really bothered my parents that I would just go away for a weekend and go flying up at these different Canadian Forces bases. So I think part of the rebellious side of me really enjoyed annoying them a little bit. So I applied to Sault College. Now, keeping in mind, this is 25 years ago, I think now, where, or maybe like 23 years ago. And we didn't have university programs in Canada at the time. We only had college, which was like 2-year programs or 3-year programs at a very, very small institute. The airport was a 45-minute drive away. It took a lot of effort to get done. And the airplanes that they decided they were going to buy for these young people to learn how to fly in was called a Zlin 242. It's a fully aerobatic Czechoslovakian 2-seater aircraft. And I'm not sure why that was the choice of this college at the time. But in your final flight, in your 3rd year, when you're about to graduate and maybe move on to the twin, and you have no more solos left, you do this emergency maneuvers flight, where you're doing basically aerobatic maneuvers. So you are doing inverted flight for about a minute and a half until the oiler cooler cut out. And as you can see, it's a fully glass dome. So even though it's a 5-point harness and you're cinched in real good, you still come out of your seat. We did 5/8 Cubans. We did an inside loop and an outside loop. Neither of those felt super great. I was very proud of myself that I did not throw up. I think it was one of a few that did not. Everybody else was pretty much ill the whole time. We did barrel rolls, we did falling leaves, we did other different maneuvers. So it was a very, very cool experience at 20 and 21 years old. But here, I already had my private pilot license coming from Air Cadets. So we just kind of did a check-in course to make sure you had the right skills. I did my single engine IFR rating, then I did a multi-engine rating, I did a multi-IFR rating, and then my commercial flight test. And that's how we kind of do it all in Canada. If you are lucky enough, we do a flyover on Remembrance Day, which is November 11th in Canada. It's a very somber day where we remember our veterans. We do a missing man flyover. And that was one of the greatest parts of my older career being there. When I graduated, I had absolutely no idea where I was going to go. Aviation, this was in 2005. So right after 9/11, the aviation industry had not yet recovered in any stroke of the matter when it came to small operators in Canada. So I was very, very lucky that I had a great friend of mine who was already working for this company in British Columbia. So I packed up my things into 6 Rubbermaid totes. I bought a Greyhound bus ticket, and then I spent the next 6 days on a bus going from Toronto, Canada, or Toronto, Ontario, all the way out to British Columbia. So basically almost the east coast of Canada to the entire west coast of Canada. There, I was very, very lucky. I got to be a dispatcher for about 6 months. And then I got to fly their 172. And then the owner bought this Islander, a Britten-Norman Islander, and was like, great, okay, great. We need to get everybody checked out. Transport Canada's coming to checkouts like in a couple of days. Who's ready to go? And all the boys that were more senior to me, I guess there were, well, all the humans, there was only guys that flew there because it was a float operator. And there wasn't too many female float pilots at the time. None of them had a multi-engine rating. And so since I was the only one with a multi-engine rating, they're like, okay, well, I guess you have to get checked out for the operating certificate because we have nobody else. So here I am at 270, maybe 300 hours flying this twin engine aircraft, 9 people back and forth across the Georgia Strait. And it was an absolutely awesome experience. I got to teach ground school. They had a
Hi, Stacey. Can you hear us?
I think it's written ours.
I think my internet might have cut out there. Can you guys hear me okay?
It did, yeah. Sorry about that. You can go ahead and start again.
All right, no worries. How long was I gone for? Do y'all know?
It wasn't very long. It was probably just about like a minute.
Oh, okay. Did I tell you my embarrassing story yet, or had that not been shared?
Nope, not yet.
Oh, good. Okay, well, I'll tell you my embarrassing story then. So, I was working dispatch and I had not a very great background in aviation at all, very naive. I didn't have any family members who were in aviation and I didn't know anybody in aviation. And so one night I'm working by myself for like the very first time, and this aircraft calls up on our dispatch frequency and their call sign is Speedbird. And they're saying, Speedbird, this is, we're trying to get in touch with Vancouver. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry. This is Seashell Dispatch. Speedbird, where are you trying to land? I mean, we're here in the water. You're free to land if you want to. There's nobody here. And they'd give a little bit of a chuckle and they, switched frequencies. But I realized very late into my career that that was probably some sort of 777 from British Airways. Clearly not trying to get seashell dispatch. So, but yeah, I didn't know any better. So maybe about a year into my flying there, the president of this company sold the company to another float operator. They did not need this Islander aircraft. And since I didn't have a float rating, they gave me a choice to either work the desk or get a float rating. And I didn't have enough money to get a float rating. And I didn't want to work the desk anymore. So I used this new tool called the internet to try to find a job. And there was a website called findapilot.com. And 20 years of internet experience later, I realized how sketchy this website seems. And I found a job for an Islander pilot on there and decided that I was going to apply. And I talked to my boss via email twice, and then a phone conversation once. And then he asked me to drive into the city to the Netherlands Antilles consulate to have my documents stamped, where they actually glued a postage stamp to it. And then he asked me to buy a one-way ticket and move to this island. Now, keeping in mind, this is really before exceptional use of the internet. Like, I had a cell phone, but it was one of the ones where you had to cancel the internet on it really quickly because it charged you too much. Did not have a screen, did not have phone calls or video chats or any of that. It just didn't exist. So I am 25 years old buying a one-way ticket to a Caribbean island where I knew absolutely no one or nothing. And I didn't know really what I was getting myself into. I think I had the naivety of a child who didn't really, or a young adult, I guess I should say, who didn't really know any better about some of the scarier things that can happen in life to young people when they travel. I guess none of that was really publicized. Again, the internet media wasn't as what it is now. But I had a very good friend who was once offered a position to play rugby for the Australian national team. And that was a big ask of a small kid from Saskatchewan, basically like Idaho, maybe Grand Forks, North Dakota, small town, middle of nowhere, maybe. And he said to me, he goes, Stace, you know what? He's like, I really wanted to take that, but I was too scared to go. And I've regretted it my whole life. And I really wish I'd taken that chance. He's like, so if you're humming and hawing about this and you're going back and forth about it, why don't you just go and see what it's like? And if you hate it, you can always come home. And I was like, you know what? That's a valid point. If you don't end up, anyways. So I got there, and the first few weeks that I was there was really strange. I landed and there was nobody there to meet me. And I'm sitting there with all my Rubbermaid totes, because I guess that's how I traveled when I was in my 20s, at the airport in St. Martin. And I was there for about 3-4 hours and nobody came and got me. And I was like, Stacey, you are an idiot. You talked to this person twice. You've never met him. You bought a one-way ticket to another country. Like, what were you thinking? Just really kicking myself. And then all of a sudden, this lady just runs up to me and she goes, "Are you Stacey?" I'm like, yeah, that's me. She goes, "Great, I'll be back in an hour." And I was like, "Oh, okay, great." And it just turned out that day in this charter operator, they were slammed and they had intended on meeting me, but they just couldn't. So I guess they just assumed I would sit there until they came. And they were right, I did. But my boss was really cool. I lived with his family for about 6-8 months until I was comfortable enough on the island to find my own place to live. And then I got really lucky because while this was a very small charter operator, 2 operators down the field was Winair, the national airline for this country, the Netherlands Antilles, and they had a gaggle of Canadian expats that were basically loving their 20s on this Caribbean island. So I got to do some ridiculously cool things, like land at this airport here. This is Saba. It is the shortest commercial airstrip in the world. It does require a lot of faith and a ton of courage. There are white X's painted on the thresholds of both ends of this runway because you are not allowed to land there unless you essentially have exceptional training or a death wish. It is a very precision approach. You need to be on target all the time. And if you can't, it's a go around. And if your brakes fail, it's a go around. Because if you don't, there's, I don't know if you can really see, but there's like a sheer drop on both ends of this runway. So there is no room for mistake. And in an Islander, you don't have beta or reverse, like how you do in a Twin Otter, which is the aircraft that was mostly used there. So you are counting on your brakes and your precision skills to land here properly and safely. The other airport that you got to land at doing this job was St. Bart's, also known as St. Bartlemy. This is where all the rich and famous spend their New Year's Eve and Christmas. So you get to see a lot of fancy people who have a lot of money. I have flown, for those of you that are old enough to know who Bette Midler is, I flew Bette Midler. She was my very first passenger flight after I was checked out and promoted to captain of an Islander. And I was convinced I was going to kill her, taking her into St. Bart's. But yeah, she was my very first paid passenger. I got to fly Anne Hathaway and a bunch of really famous footballers from Europe, Saudi princes, and a bunch of other really cool places. So this airport here is very, very treacherous. They have lost many aircraft coming in to this field. The runway threshold of 10, and I think this picture does it a bit more justice. This is actually me flying this aircraft and flying this aircraft here. I had a friend that stayed there for the day. I dropped him off early in the morning and picked him up late in the day, and he just spent the whole day photographing us flying. So this saddle here is in between two hills, and there's a white cross on the upper right side of this picture on the left, and that is to commemorate the 19 passengers that were killed in a Twin Otter crash when they tried to go beta in flight because they were too high. And one engine went beta and the other one did not. So we are reminded constantly of how quickly things can change in aviation. So as you can see, people like to stand on this hill where my aircraft is in the left picture. You can see that there's two folks just standing right underneath my airplane. I don't know if that was the smartest place for them to be standing that day, but if they didn't move, that was their choice, I guess. So what we did was we held that distance down the mountain the whole way, and then we used ground effect to flare, and then we hammered on the brakes and usually taxied off. And then in departure, we kept it as low as we could, and then we pulled up at the end of the runway. I don't know what the idea behind that was all these years later, but it was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, you can't spend your entire career bopping around the Caribbean. I mean, I guess you could, but my dream was to get to an airline. So I really wanted to make sure that I did that, and flying day VFR in an Islander, and even got to fly the Twin Otter very shortly, about 6 months worth of flying it. I knew I needed to move on to something that was IFR, probably in Canada. So I went to a company that specialized in medevac flying, nighttime and daytime. Quick dispatch. From the time you get the medevac phone call, you are 10 minutes to airborne. I learned a lot about myself in this operation. I learned that I do not like to be rushed. I don't like getting a phone call at 2 in the morning. I certainly don't like sleeping at the airport, even though it was a big loungy, comfy chair. And I also didn't like the group of people that I was working with at this job. And while I'm thankful that I had this experience, I wish that I would have had a mentor in aviation where I could have said, hey, these not so great things are happening to me at this company. How would you recommend I handle them? Because I basically just didn't say anything and just stuck it out as best I could. That ended up working out for me professionally in the long run, but I still felt like if I had had a mentor, I could have handled the situation better on my end, and it would have saved me a lot of grief and mental heartache. I did find flying medevac very, very challenging. The night day flips were very hard. I also didn't like seeing young kids hurt in accidents. It was really something that I didn't handle super well. Not that it bothered me while I was flying, but I still think about some of the kids that we took out of car accidents, and and it was just it took a lot out of us, because based on where this medevac was, it was Northern Ontario, and they only called you if it was really, really serious, and you have to fly these people south to larger hospitals that had more resources. So that was not something that I enjoyed. 6 months into this contract was given to the proper municipal agency that was supposed to have it. We were just a contract placeholder. and they got their airplanes sorted. But this was a King Air 200, and it was a really good machine to fly. I really liked flying it. I worked in a lot of northern gravel strips, some paved strips, working with the different paramedics. That was very cool. Like the people on that part were cool. But again, it was challenging. So anyways, this contract ended about 6 months after I got there. And I was furloughed for 6 months. I didn't have a job. And then I got to come back into the training department where I built training programs that were Transport Canada approved. I worked with the flight attendants. I did their recurrent and annual training. I learned a lot about cabin safety and egress and the different things that they have to go through, which is kind of what sparked my passion for human factors and egress. But I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So after I was in the training department for a little bit, the company was like, you know what, we're going to train you on this Dash 7 and we're going to let you go over to Africa for one tour, but then we really don't have a job for you. So I went over and I did my first tour and it was incredible. I absolutely loved it. I loved the machine. I loved the crews. I loved the work we were doing. It was all humanitarian mission work for the United Nations. It was absolutely an eye-opener for me on what humans are put through. I have seen mothers walk barefoot for weeks to try to get their children polio vaccines because they've heard through the whisperings that they have extra polio vaccines in this other country, and they will dodge bullets and landmines and starvation and cholera and all these other diseases just trying to get their kids to these vaccinations. We are so incredibly lucky at the medical care we have in North America and the food resources that we have. We once spent time at one of the villages where they had not had clean water because the bucket that their well used had disintegrated because they basically use old petroleum bottles. I guess maybe they're new, but anyway. So we said, well, can we buy a couple for you? And they said, that's a big burden to ask. We wouldn't ask that of you. And said, well, we'll walk into town. We got some time while the UN was sorting something out. So we went into town and the cost of one petroleum bottle was 5 cents Canadian, which I don't know, maybe like a penny US with the exchange rate. Like it was so cheap. So we bought them 4 just because they only had 4. And then we bought some school tablets, like little blackboard slates. We bought some fruits and vegetables for the kiddos and some school supplies like chalk. And we brought this all back and the kids went nuts. It was, they were just so happy and so thankful. And they kept saying, thank you, and shaking our hands. And it was really, truly, we are so absolutely lucky for what we have in our world. So that was my first tour in Africa. I was very, very lucky to go back many times. I've been to Central African Republic, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, South Sudan, Ghana, South Africa, Ethiopia, Uganda. I've also been to Afghanistan. I switched companies after this first tour because they didn't have any good flying jobs. And they said, you know what, we'd just rather you go on. So I spent about 3 years off and on in Afghanistan as a civilian with basically a bulletproof vest. And that's about it for protection. We did have a close protection team, but they were only on the ground outside of our compound. So when we were in the UN and all these forward outpost based or forward operating bases, these FOBs, there was really nothing for us until we got kind of in the enclosure as opposed to the airport. So this is the Dash 7. I'll argue tooth and nail, it's the greatest aircraft ever made. It's low, it's slow, it has a lot of problems, but this thing has saved my life more times than ever. The 4-engine aspect of it is very, very cool. It also has the certification to take off on 3 engines only. There's a lot of different parameters, and we did train for that in the simulator. So it's a very, very well-built machine. These are some of the photos of the greatest people that I've ever had an opportunity to work with. As you can see, we get a chance to like feed some puppies in Afghanistan. The 3 of us in the center is my last crew, my first crew as captain, and my last crew there as captain too. I just so happened the rotation, I ended up with Cheryl as our flight attendant and Khalil as our FO. All Canadians in Afghanistan, and that's in Bamiyan. Very, very beautiful place. You might have heard of the giant Buddhas that were there that aren't there anymore, but Bamiyan's a very, very cool town. Cheryl, my flight attendant. The lower left picture is my friend Kiwi. He has a real name, it's Chris, but he and I were in Ivory Coast together, flying all over different UN peacekeeping missions. Cheryl and I are about to get into this helicopter against our better judgment, but they told us to just put our body armor on and we'd be fine. As soon as we took off, it was a Russian crew. As soon as we took off, the Russian flight attendant was this big burly dude, and he comes around and he starts handing out cigarettes, and he hands me one, and there's like a porthole window above my head, so he unlocks it and lowers it, and he hands cigarettes out to everybody, and Cheryl and I are looking at each other like, are we gonna die? Like, what does this guy know that we don't know? And then Cheryl whispers to me, she's like, smoke him if you got him, I guess. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, where are we right now? Like, how is this my life? And it ended up being that the flight attendant was just being sweet, that they had gotten a carton of cigarettes from home, and he was sharing the cigarettes with everybody. I didn't smoke, so I was like, well, I guess I'll just hold on to this. But I don't know what I ended up doing with it, but it was some very, very cool experiences and different stories. We got to fly President Ellen. She came, this was in Liberia. She needed to go for a very big ceremony honoring some people that I don't remember now who they were, but it was very, very, a very big honor at the time. She requested our crew because I was a woman, and I don't know if she thought I was like the first officer or the captain, but she said, I want the girl pilot. So the girl pilot is what she got. And we weren't going to argue with her because it was a really cool day in Conakry, eating really good food and experiencing a really neat ceremony. Some various other photos from my trip. I love kids. I just think that they are the most awesome part of our whole world. So anytime I have an opportunity to engage with children or teach them or learn something from them or hear about their world and their life, I take that opportunity. In the lower left corner, these are boys in Faizabad, Afghanistan, that once they realized we spoke English, just encircled us, and they kept asking us to write out different English words. So we would change one letter. So we would make it like bat, cat, rat, mat. You get the point. And they would read it out loud, and then they would try to get the pronunciation right. And we did this for about 6 hours before we had to load the plane up and go again. And it was a really, really neat experience. These are some other photos from my time in various countries in Africa. I was also really lucky that I got to fly this aircraft into Islamabad, Pakistan. That's me flying into Islamabad in the upper left corner. I also got to fly this aircraft home from Afghanistan to Toronto. So these are icebergs out of, I think it's Iceland. It could also be Greenland. I don't know. I know that's terrible. I used to know all these places cold by heart, and it's been so many years I've forgotten. But this was our victory lap into Toronto. This was again on the tarmac in Faizabad in the lower left corner. And then just some various other hero shots. But one of the best parts about having this overseas job with the UN is you had to come home sometimes to do training in between your tours. But if you didn't, they would just let you stay wherever you wanted to go. So on this particular time, my best friend Emma and I, we went to South Africa, where she was born. She went back for the first time since she and her family immigrated to Canada. And we did an elephant sanctuary tour. We drove through these back roads. We drank wine in Stellenbosch and Paarl. We went down to the Cape of Good Hope, Table Mountain. We went out to the island where Nelson Mandela was kept. And we learned a lot about the history of this really beautiful, rich country, and a lot of the really awful things that humans do to each other. And I think that it behooves us to learn about our history, because if we don't, we are doomed to repeat it. So every time I travel to a new country, I try to learn their history. I try to learn what foods they eat. I try to eat the new foods, because I really want to immerse myself in their culture and what they can do. And working for the UN, you've got to go to a new country every 3 to 6 months. So I was really lucky that I got paid to live in these countries that people typically only go as tourists or never go at all. I loved my time at the UN. Unfortunately, we had to deal with some very dicey security issues. When I was in Afghanistan, we narrowly escaped a car bomb. And that was a really terrible experience. I don't want to go into too many details, but I decided that I was going to take a break from Afghanistan after that. And I went to South Sudan. And I was thinking, oh, this is pretty cool, brand new country. This is awesome. It was a lot more freedom. We got to go out for dinner. We could do early morning runs, before the sun got too hot. And then about 3 weeks into that tour, a military coup started, where the people that were loyal to the vice president overthrew the government. And then it was 3 months of back and forth between pro and anti-government forces. We were assigned to take people to different parts of the world. And that was a really big challenge in the first few days because the coup was still very active and ongoing. I could tell you a lot of different stories about that, but yeah, pretty dicey at times, but I'm still glad that I was the captain there and was able to make good choices for my crew and for the delegates that we ended up rescuing and getting out of town. So when I was done that tour, my family's like, yeah, do you think maybe you might want to think about airline life? And I was like, yeah, I guess I could probably do that. So I applied to WestJet in Canada. It was a WestJet Encore, actually, a wholly owned regional subsidiary of WestJet mainline. So I flew the Q400 there for 18 months. And then I did my flow to mainline onto the 737 jet. And I have been an FO there ever since. I'm about to go captain in the next year or so. So that would be my next big challenge. I was captain on the Q400 and I was captain on the Dash 7. Basically, I've been captain on everything I've ever flown. Yep. And so the 737 will be my next big upgrade, I guess. And it's not just coffee and ILS approaches. I know a lot of people think, you show up to the airport, you get your coffee, you go shoot the SID and the star and all that stuff. And it is very much like that. And there's a lot of, low time in between. But you do have some really great overnights. You do get a lot of ice cream and go for hikes and check out new restaurants and have your own little adventures. And your crews are usually really cool and you usually travel as a pack. And, you get to hang out and, be silly with the junior airline pilot hat and like the gift shop. And at WestJet, we always say I take my job seriously, but not myself. So we always play around. But also when you get to have an airline life, you get to go to crazy, wonderful places. So this was in Fiji. My husband and I did our honeymoon there because we got there for next to nothing on airline passes. And this is me in our overwater bungalow in the top left corner, just loving my life and not really believing that this is where I'm at right now. The lower left picture is my husband drinking coffee in Osaka, Japan, while our 2 children are sleeping next to us. We've taken them to Dublin. They've been to England so many times. They have gone on hundreds of flights, and it's all essentially free with your airline privileges. So now what? When I decided that working overseas was fun, but I mean, you're stuck in a compound, like there's nothing you can do. And you've got the internet and you've got the same 6 faces you've seen for 6 months. You're like, okay, I need to do something with my life. So I only had a college diploma, like a 3-year college diploma, very similar to an associate's in the US. I decided that I was going to go back to school. So I did my undergrad and my master's degree all online. And I did a bachelor's degree, Bachelor's of Science, Aeronautics with a specialization in human factors, human cognition, decision-making, how our brain works, sensation perception, cognitive psychology, like all that great stuff. And then with my master's degree, I was very curious about how we make decisions, how you can have a 10,000-hour captain that runs out of fuel and crashes an airplane. Like, how does that happen? So I wanted to learn more about human error, crew resource management, how we make mistakes, human factors in aviation. And I started doing courses on my own. I went and did a HVACs course. And then I did a fatigue course. I've done so many courses outside of college. But then I joined different professional societies like SAAC, the International Society of Air Safety Investigators. And I was very lucky. I wrote a paper for their Rudolph Kapustin Scholarship, which is coming due pretty soon. So if you're interested in some free money and a trip to Nashville this year, highly recommend you submit a paper. Their website would have what they're talking about this year. So do that. So I wrote a paper, it was accepted and it won. And so I got to go to The Hague and present my paper and my findings. And basically my paper was on applying lessons learned from commercial aviation to commercial space when it comes to human factors. The other thing I love, as I said, kiddos. I love small children. I think they are the greatest part of our whole world. And we are responsible to them as grownups, as young adults, as professionals, to give back to this community and teach them all the things we didn't know or wish we knew, or give them opportunities we wish we had. So any opportunity I have to reach out, talk to young people, and discuss with them what I can do, that would be the highlight of my life. The slides that I can't show you because I did not have them in here. Aside from all this, I am a mom to 3 absolutely ridiculously, incredibly awesome kiddos, happily married to a man I met in Afghanistan. And together we have this absolutely insane life. I decided that after my master's degree was done, that I was a bit frustrated. I wanted to do this massive research project. And my advisor's like, look, Stace, you don't have to like change the world. You just have to graduate. I'm like, yeah, I get that. But I wanted this major research. And he's like, scale it back. You don't have time to do that. I was like, okay, fine. So it bugged me for years that I wasn't allowed to do this research. And then I was like, you know what, forget this. I'm just going to go get my PhD. So when I applied to UND, I was like, look, I need to get this research done. I have this idea in mind. I want to change the world. I need this to happen. And so I was very, very lucky that they chose me and a couple other people that year to join the aerospace PhD program. I'm just finishing my 2nd year right now. And because of my background and my experience in aviation and human factors, I was granted the phenomenal honor and opportunity to be an adjunct here at the University of North Dakota. I am so incredibly thankful for that opportunity. I love the students that I work with. I try to build good relationships and professional rapport with them. Because I totally understand what it's like to be a student. And sometimes your weeks get away with you, and sometimes life happens, and sometimes blizzards occur and you have to evacuate and you leave your laptop behind and you had an exam that week. And then there's that panic that sets in. And so when I'm teaching human factors and aircraft accident investigation, I always try to remember what it's like to be a student under panic, hoping their professor gets back to them with some really good news. So I always try to be that professor that has really, really good news for my students when they reach out. But aside from all that, being a pilot on the 737, a mom of 3, my kids are little, they're 7, 5, and 2. I'm heavily involved with the Airline Pilots Association, our pilot union. I am the training program coordinators chair for ALPA National. I'm also the Aircraft Accident Investigative Board member, which means if your airline has an accident, you're probably going to hear from me or somebody on our team. And excuse me. And what we do is we come to your airline and we walk your investigators through the process. So I deal with the Transportation Safety Board, the National Transportation Safety Board all the time. I also help IFELPA, which is the International Federation of Airline Pilots. So these are pilots from airlines all over the world that come to these different meetings, and we talk about different issues that we're seeing with aircraft, with airports, with policies and procedures. And we try to do research and write these white papers and position papers on best practices. We advise ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, on different things like cabin egress and cabin safety and seat pitch and flammability in the cabin. Also, the accident investigative group has a lot of working groups within ICAO. How I find the time for this and classes, I don't know. I think my secret about having a time machine is going to finally be revealed. So yeah, very, very, very lucky to do what I do here at UND. And I apologize for my pictures not being there. I want you guys to take this with you. Every single pilot that you ever come across, the old ones, the new ones, the ones in between, he or she will have a very personal story about how they ended up in control of that aircraft. And every time we take an airplane flying, we bring with us all of the things we've learned in the thousands of hours and millions of miles we've flown in all the crazy countries, under gunfire, under pressure, in the good days where we laughed for hours. And my goal for myself in my career was I wanted to leave aviation a little bit differently than when it started. I wanted to make it better for those that came behind me. And I think that I'm doing that, one small act of kindness at a time. So I am aware that my career was very, very different than what it is right now. And if you choose to go straight from college, university, flight instructing, straight to an airline, you're still going to make your own adventures. You're going to do awesome flying overseas or domestically if you want. You can get involved with your pilot union or your safety group. Whatever really makes you motivated and tweaks you, that's something that you really need to follow with a passion, because yeah, we all love flying cool airplanes to cool cities. But when we do something that we're super passionate about, and that could be just flying, or maybe it's safety work or what have you, I think that's when we get that little spark of joy that makes us go every single day. So thank you guys so much for listening to my presentation. I am absolutely happy to have you all reach out after this if you want. Stacey.jackson@und.edu. Please sign up for my classes. I do human factors, aircraft accident investigation, the intro, and then the advanced course. I also teach the ALPA aircraft accident investigation course that UND co-hosts with us twice a year. The next one's in May. It's pretty full with a bunch of students too. And then the next one's in October. We did host one in November, but as you guys know, November weather isn't necessarily the kindest. So I highly recommend signing up for the May course, which you would do through either Dr. Wild, myself, or Dr. Ulrich. I think they all have access to that sign-up sheet. But it's a really cool course. It's out of the 727. We run you through like it's a real accident. And it is definitely a lot of fun that whole time. So yeah. That's my career so far. Who knows where I'm going to go when I grow up? So we'll see.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stacey. If you don't mind, we're going to go ahead and do questions right now for Stacey while you're up on the Zoom. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Can you hear the questions?
I cannot.
All right, I'll repeat for you. Can you talk a little bit about your PhD research that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, and don't anyone steal my idea, because it took me a really long time to come up with this. I'm just teasing. So what I want to do is I want to talk about how we certify aircraft in the United States. And what we do right now is we have this 90-second rule, and it was created in 1990, and it does involve a certification standard. And we do need a good standard to certify aircraft. This might not be the best one, but it's still nice to have a benchmark, even though this isn't really a great one. But the problem is when we do the certification standard testing, it's all airline employees. They're not bringing their bags. They're not bringing their kids. It's not older folks, people of reduced mobility. So the problem is right now we do get half the aircraft out in under 90 seconds. That's the certification standard, but that's not reflective of the demographic of the people that we have flying in our aircraft right now. That doesn't show a great demographic, that doesn't show a great representation of the seat pitch when bags are around the cabin. So what I want to do is we do not always run live certification tests. Sometimes we just run software to prove that it's valid. So what I would like to do is get demographic information from, say, Toronto to Florida, find out what the average number of men, average number of women, average number of children, persons of reduced mobility, pets in cabin, etc. And I want to find out how long would it take the average of these flights to actually get out of the aircraft. And then what I want to do is I want to develop an app. And what I want to do is allow the CSAs, the customer service reps, to run this app as soon as the flight closes 1 hour prior to departure. And then the app will say, okay, based on worst case scenario, if you move this person to here and this person to here and this person to here, you're going to reduce your time to egress by 5 minutes. Because what we're seeing right now in some of this research is that it could be 20, 30 minutes before we get a whole airplane evacuated. Some flights have 25 wheelchairs in 200 people. I feel like that's a lot. Not that I have anything against folks in a wheelchair using an airplane, but if the flight attendant can't help them out of the aircraft, is that safe? Do they have a right to know that the flight attendant might not get to them in time? So these are all different questions that we are not answering right now. The other time that I would want this app to be run is when the flight attendants close the main cabin door. Then they can turn to the pilots and say, look, today your time to egress is 4 minutes, 10 seconds, and that's with an optimized cabin. Other things we don't do, or we don't put people in emergency exit rows. So when we have had to have an evacuation from the overwing exits, people weren't briefed because people weren't in that row because they didn't pay for it. So I want to see standards change. That way, if you don't have, say a fairly empty aircraft and people haven't bought that row, that you have to physically move somebody to that row. I mean, would anybody like the exit row? You'd ask for a volunteer, of course, but I'd like it so that way we fill those roles, so that way we can brief those people, so that way there is somebody to open that egress option. So yeah, my PhD research is essentially focusing on this. I also have a lot of really great research ideas that my PhD partner, Heather McNevin, and I are actively working on. We just presented at the grad some of the research that we started. We brainstormed the idea in Dr. Vacek's class, and then we continued on with Dr. Dusenberry's class in statistics, and then we continued on with Dr. Daku's class in the summertime. So like all three of these doctors were super instrumental in like kind of sparking this idea. And we're looking at writing this paper and getting it published pretty quickly, because we actually have statistically significant data from a survey that we put out to 230,000 people. Those probably overlapped in some groups, but we ended up having like 660 responses, 580 after the data was clean. And yeah, we have some really statistically significant data that shows that women are more likely to report reportable events when they could have got away with it and not reported. So it's kind of neat. And also 70% of near mid-air event collisions do not get reported, and it's a reportable event. So what we're trying to do is develop, with the help of Dr. Wild, a formula that companies can use. So say they get like 1 or 2 SMS reports and they're like, this isn't a big deal. We only get like 2 reports. How bad can this possibly be? We want them to take those 2 reports, apply a corrective factor to be like, okay, well, even though you only got 2, this is saying like you had 5. So it might give them the leverage to apply a cost prohibitive mitigation strategy that might not have been possible with only 2. So we are in the middle of doing that in our infinite free time.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Does anyone have any other questions? I have a quick question for you. What was your favorite country that you traveled to in your lifetime?
This is so tough. You guys are asking the tough questions tonight. I don't have one particular favorite country. I do have a favorite continent, and that is Africa. I think, though, if I ever make it to Antarctica, that might change. New Zealand was a top country too, but the different countries in Africa always have had my heart, just for the people and the food and the differences between the different countries. But yeah, lots of really cool places. You guys are so lucky. I'm so envious of where you are in your careers right now, because you're just about to start your greatest adventure. And I'm kind of halfway through mine. So if I could go do it all over again, you bet I would.
Well, thank you so much. Unless anyone has another burning question they'd like to ask, let's give it up for Stacey one more time.
So I'm going to talk, well, okay, it's nice to see everybody here. My name is Joe Vacek. I have had a number of you in class, and it's good to see you again. And thanks for the invitation to do this talk. So tonight I'm going to talk less about airplanes and just more, give you kind of more advice, I guess, through my eyes, which is inconsistent. I'm being very upfront about that for some very weird reasons, and I'll get into that. And hopefully what I've got is helpful. So, all right, tell me where to click to go forwards. Is it on this one or on this one?
Down here, you can just click.
Oh,
Yeah, arrow keys.
perfect. So The theme tonight is going to be a little baby sheep. And I know the rumor's out. There is one here tonight. She's not in this room because I didn't want to have to clean the carpet, but afterwards, you're more than welcome to come see her. Well, I'll tell you about her in a little bit. So we're going to talk about a little bit about me first, and through basically the metaphor of a little baby sheep. And then we're going to talk about this inconsistent advice continuing with that metaphor. So Stacey, you're still with me. Can you hear me okay? You're a good check.
You sound fantastic. I hear you loud and clear. 5 by 5.
Okay. So she was born. So I have a sheep operation, and it's a lot of fun. And they're coming out everywhere now because it's springtime. We just had 2 this morning, and everybody's healthy, but this one wasn't. She is right now like maybe a month and a half old, and she's smaller than the ones that were born yesterday. And the diagnosis is, of course, failure to thrive. Something's going on. We don't know what, but we're taking care of her and giving her what we can. And she's actually bonding really well with us. She'll follow me around. She comes in the house. I gave her a bath this morning, this afternoon, so she'd be clean for today. And she's really sharp. She learns stuff faster than the other ones, specifically like not to touch the electric fence and where the food is. And I'm using her as a metaphor because I have some pretty messed up physiology myself. I don't look it, and I'll explain what that is here in the next couple slides. But throughout my life, I've almost had it ended for me quite a few times, and so I've got a really weird physiology. And the first issue I had when I was born was failure to thrive. I was just a runt. I wasn't going to make it. And I've had to fight to make it my whole life. And I've learned some really good lessons from doing that. And I'm hoping to pass those on. So let me first explain what these weird physiology things are, and then we'll talk about what I've learned. So this is a really deep dive into some human physiology. This is the electron transport mechanism. So every cell in your body has to do this. You have sodium and potassium ions that basically power everything, right? They make the electric signals that allow your muscles to move and your neurons to fire. And this is the process that it works in normal humans. And the gene that it runs, that regulates it is this SLC26A3. Mine 4, 5, and 6 don't work. They just stop. And that results in all kinds of fun things. The physiology or the gene presentation is really interesting. So there's a normal human abdomen on the left. If you went in and got like a sonogram, and that's what my body looks like. So I've got fluid everywhere. You perhaps have heard of like cystic fibrosis. That is a mutation on the same genome that causes people to retain a bunch of fluid in their lungs, and it kills them because it drowns them. Mine, I'm lucky it's not, it's below my diaphragm, but it's not great. So I have to do all kinds of things to deal with it and to overcome it. So my daily is basically distressing, right? It's kind of like having a stomach flu all the time. It's a lot of pain. And I learned this recently. I thought it was normal when I was growing up. I was young and tough, and I was like, okay, I'm just weak, so I can be strong. I don't know. I've learned later that no, it's not normal. So it hurts a lot, and that's distracting. But there's some interesting things. I'm very salty because of that fluid imbalance. So I can't use easily touch screens. I have a really hard time. Like my phone won't recognize me because I'm too salty. My animals love it because they think I'm a salt lick. They follow me around and like lick my hands, and which is endearing. My core muscles are really, really strong because I have to contain all that fluid. I can't, if I just like relax, it really hurts. And I'm also permanently hungry. I only absorb about 30%, maybe 40 of the calories I put in. So I'm always hungry. And I really love French fries and Big Macs because they have a high calorie density, but they're not healthy to eat, right? So I'm up against kind of some annoying things. some days I feel really good and I feel like $1,000,000, like I could, and some days I can't leave the bathroom, right? It depends. It's unpredictable. So I've learned over my life that I need to really plan ahead. And I've learned some strategies, and these strategies work really well for normal physiological humans too. And so those are the things that I'm going to tell you. So what I've got to do, right, is overcome all these irritating things that really kind of push me back. So my entire life, I've learned how to kind of overcome over myself. So I have to work harder. So I'll give you some examples of that, some of which is airplane related, some of which is not. So aviation wise, Stacey's got an amazing CV for aviation. I started flying airplanes because I wanted to. They're really cool, right? So I started flying in high school, kind of like she did, and got my private license, and I wasn't surrounded by aviators. So it was kind of you guys are in a great spot because everybody around here loves aviation. When I did it, I was kind of like the weird kid. But that was okay. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I learned some really good skills, right? And I got really lucky. I got 1 hour of aerobatic instruction in my training, and I was at UND as an instructor pilot. And the students wanted to start up an aerobatic team. We still have it. And I had my 1 hour. I was like, okay, sure, this sounds fun. So I joined up and I went to my first competition, and it was like, okay, we're going to fly this. And I went in and did it with 1 hour of experience. And I forgot to breathe the whole time because it was so intense of a focus. But I did it. I breathed afterwards, and I still taught all my students after that. You got to breathe while doing this. So I spent most of my time in aviation instructing aerobatics, and it was great. We gave each other fun nicknames, depending on things you messed up, right? Or things that you didn't like doing. One kid, I remember I named him Vitamin G because he loved pulling G-force, high turns, right? That was his thing, and he was good at it. And I was relaxed once I was like looking out the side window to clear the area, and he rolled into one, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't tensed up. And so I grayed out. He pulled up to like 5 maybe, and you can't see. So I'm like squeezing as hard as I can, to try to push blood back up to my head. And all of a sudden I hear over the intercom, he's like, I can't see, because he had grayed himself out. And I said, I can't either, let go. And so he did, and we both came back, and the airplane was still pointed mostly at the sky, and it was fine. But I've been really lucky to then transition to sort of like an admin role for the aerobatic team. So I've got this box full of rings, championship rings. I didn't earn any of them. I just was either driving the bus, right? Or my nickname, aerobatic team nickname is now become Absent Father because I don't show up to the practices. Okay, you win. But it's great. And the people that do it are very good. And I love watching them succeed. I'm very proud to be a faculty member here in our program, because I can work with my mind a lot better than I can work with my body now. I'm not sure if I had continued on in aviation. I had an internship at American Airlines, and I got hired, and it was great. And I was like, I'm ready to go. And then September 11th, it shut the whole thing down. So now what? So I changed. I went to law school, but I don't know if I could handle it now, physically speaking. So I'm really lucky that circumstances dictated that for me. So now I work with my brains more than my body. And those are 2 patents I've got working with counter UAS in the UAS sector. So I mentioned I went to law school because aviation at that point in time wasn't working out. And that took a long time. It's 3 years. You can't really think about anything else. And so I'm a practicing lawyer now, and I'm really proud of that. I do aviation law. I do other kinds of law too. I've got a number of other things going on too. I'm a very curious person. So in addition to my sheep and farm operation, I used to have a construction company, and I've done some work with startup companies doing remote sensing stuff, and some other businesses. And so I've got like multiple streams, businesses going on. And I really find that invigorating because I don't think I could do one thing. Focus, just, fly airplanes, take off, cruise, land. I'm always interested in experimenting, and experimentation is not something we want to have happen on short final, right? So Personality wise, I'm really, really thrilled to be doing what I'm doing. One of the things I'm most proud of is just volunteer work. I volunteer on a regional rescue team, helping folks who get hurt or trapped or injured or whatever in water. So I dive and swim and airboat and play with fun toys for that. So in my life, I've realized, right, like I've got a lot of struggles, but I've worked so hard to overcome, to constantly like, I can beat my body at this, right? So I should not be able to run. It's painful. Physically, I get exhausted really easily, but I trained up and completed an Ironman, and I qualified for Kona just because I wanted to see if I could do it. It sucked. 18 months of training, and the race was, look at my face, right? It was like, this is fun. But I did it. And I did some crazy long swims and raced my bicycle across the United States just to see if I could do it. And I learned I learned how to focus and like basically ignore pain and move towards a goal. And that's really helped me. I mean, I didn't think I was gonna be able to have a family, and I managed that. So those are my boys and my wife and dog at the farm. And I shoot competitively because I'm have a hard time holding still. And so that just forces me to do that. So that's kind of the theme, right? So you've got the flavor now. I'm going to move into giving you inconsistent advice. So I picked 3 things to sort of colorize this. And the first is that be a relentless planner and go with the flow at the same time. There internally, you can't do both, right, at the same time. And that's why it's inconsistent. And then the second, fly at full afterburner, but also stop and smell the roses. Same kind of thing. Inconsistent internally, but it does work out. I'll show you. And then lastly, give 110%, but leave some reserve. You always need it. So we'll do the first one right here. I've learned there's no way to control stuff that comes at you, right? People want stuff, medical emergencies, you name it, right? It happens. And you can try to plan it out and keep it in your head, but the best thing to do is be absolutely relentless about controlling what you deal with and then when. If you don't, you'll let other things start to kind of run your life. And that leads to, feelings of loss of control and anxiety and maybe, even paralysis. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've just got too much going on. I think as students, you probably all have sensed this at some point. So long ago, I learned about this particular system of how to do it. This is kind of a nugget from it. So for everything that comes to you, and it doesn't matter how, right? It could be a family member sending you a text, something on social, an assignment that I give you in my 403 class. It's something that's coming to you, and you just got to grab it and deal with it somehow. So if you can handle it right on the spot and just do it and take care of it, good. My general rule is if it's something that's going to take me more than a couple minutes, I don't have time for that. So then I'll either defer it. That doesn't mean procrastinate. It means figure out schedule like a time to deal with it and then just move on to something else, or delegate it, right? If it's something that you just can't handle and you have other people that can, push it. That's okay. Or just drop it. Don't leave it sit in your inbox, whatever that looks like, right? This system works great. And there are all kinds of commercial products that you can buy to help you do it, but it doesn't really matter, honestly. If you just control what you pay attention to, you'll be steps ahead. So I've gotten some success doing that, right? Just simply prioritizing time, because that's one thing none of us can get any more of. So every year I make sure what I'm doing in the moment, in doing it, delegating it, or whatever, matches what I want. So every year I sit down and I do a runway up to 50,000 foot. This is aviation again, I guess, but kind of philosophy. So runway stuff is what's going on in your life right now, right? So tonight I have to walk out to the barn and feed my sheep and make sure there's enough water for the night. So that's a runway thing, right? It's something I've got to do right now. It's staring me in the face. And then you can see as you move up in altitude, you move out in timeline. So what do you want in the next 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 10 years, right? For you, it's probably going to be like, I want to finish this particular course, right? Earn my commercial maybe CFI, whatever rating. And then in 3 to 5 years, get hired. But Okay, cool. But make sure what you're doing at the runway and what you're doing in the next year supports all that, right? So if you've got, and I know all of you are here because you're, engaged and busy and professional, make sure that you're focusing it all in moving you along in a direction. As you get older, I've especially learned, you will be pulled in multiple directions, sometimes in ways that you can't predict or that you don't want. If you use some kind of annual review just to sort of align yourself to what your life goals are, you can manage those things and it'll feel a lot better, even if you got a lot against you. So that's what I do. This is the relentless planning part, but here's the going with the flow part, right? Plans like these are hilarious. I look back at mine and I started doing these things back when I was a little older than you, maybe about 25, 26. And I look back and laugh at the things that I thought, okay, this is what I want to do because, right, circumstances. So whether it's COVID that slowed us all down and we all know how that was, right? Or some sort of surprise or even something good, plans are hilarious, right? They change. But the point is you went through the exercise of planning it. So you now know what you want and you can deal with, right, the go around or, career hiccup in the moment. So how can I tie this to my sheep again, right? Well, sometimes lambs come at the least opportune time. When we had this blizzard, remember, what was it, a week ago or whatever? Guess what? That's when some lambs showed up and I just had to deal with it, even though they didn't fit in all the plans. So there's my first item of inconsistent advice. So we're gonna move to the second one, fly at full afterburner while also stopping to smell the roses. And so this takes on a little bit more of a somber tone. Right now in here, right, our probability of making it to tomorrow is pretty high. There's a very low probability, a little higher for me, but I've learned to deal with that you're not going to make it. But the further out you go in time, the much more likely it is. And that's something that we don't like to think about because it's, right? I don't like to think about getting old and decrepit and dying, or even next year, possibly losing my family and my life and all this. I was working on my driveway. I used to live in town. Now I obviously on farm, and I was like ripping out some sidewalk to fix it. It was all broken up. And my neighbor at the time, his name was George, and he was like a World War II paratrooper veteran. This guy was like decorated and totally modest about it. And he came over, kind of dotted over with his cane. He's like, "What you doing?" And so I'm like, "Yeah, I'm ripping this out." And how long is it going to take you? I'm like, "I don't know, maybe a month." And he's like, "Wow, a month." And then some other neighbors came over and they're all telling me how to, like make my sidewalk. And at the end of it, I was trying to digest all their advice. And George leaned over and he goes, "What are you waiting for? Just get it done." And he was like 95 years old, right? Because think World War II time vet, and he has seen history. And I took that. I was like, "Yeah, you know what? You're right. I might not have much time left. I know you don't, because you're at the end of your life, and I know I don't either. So I better just do it. So I don't care what the neighbors think. I'm just gonna get it done." So that phrase has always stuck with me, right? So if you're stuck an indecisive point, like, do I do this? Do I not do that? Where do I go? Right? Sort of like Stacey mentioned, you get one shot sometimes. And if it's to move to the Caribbean or whatever, right? What are you waiting for? You might not get another opportunity. So the stopping to smell the roses part, right, is the opposite of flying at full afterburner. You need to live your life as you're living it. As the corollary for the waiting for, you only get one decision for every moment, right? Once it's passed, it's done. When we're done talking tonight, we won't ever get to go back and rehab this conversation. And if you think about it, there are every day lambs that die, people that die. And the last time that you talk to someone you love might be the last time. So you want to make sure that whatever it is you're doing it mindfully, intentionally, and recognizing the fact that that might be the last one. So it better be good. Okay. And on to our third one. Give 100%, 110%, but leave yourself some reserve. I used to laugh at, "Oh, give 110%. Like, who does that?" Well, I have to frequently. Humans have incredible stamina. So as I was learning to be an athlete, right, because I was supposed to not be able to, I tried this thing called adventure racing. Anybody heard of adventure racing? Good. It's crazy. Don't try it. Actually, do try it, but gently. So the idea is like orienteering. You get a map and a compass, and we all know how to work maps and compasses. And you're on a team of like 4 people, and you have to have, you know, an off-road, like a mountain bike and a whitewater pack raft that you can carry around, and some good shoes and maybe some other gear like a water purifier and you know, some survival gear, because you're supposed to make it from point A over the mountain range, down the Whitewater Gorge, et cetera, over to point B, stopping to grab the checkpoints in between and punch your little passport card for points. And this is over the course of like 24 hours, 48 hours. Some of them can go up to a week, right? So it's basically like survival for fun. And I was out doing these things, and during this one race, I think we were like 48 hours in of a like a 5-day race, and stuff was just falling apart. I had gotten cold and hypothermic, and I'm navigating, and I can't even like figure out which way is up on the map. So I asked my buddy who doesn't know anything about maps. I'm like, I need you to just, you know, navigate for a while and lead. He's like, I don't know what I'm doing. So we had a little, you know, fight about that. I'm like, I think you can right now because you're more capable than I am. I need to just warm up. So I borrowed everybody's clothes and rain gear and just like, and we were on the bikes at that point and just kind of shivered and rode until I warmed it up a little bit. And they did it. At the beginning of the race, right, they were laughing. They're like, you're the only one who knows how to navigate because you're a pilot, right? You can, and they were like, we don't know, but they did it. I was like incoherent for a couple hours, but when I popped out of it, right, we'd done it. We were on course. We'd made some checkpoints. It was great. Later on in that same race, we ran out of food, and another member collapsed because she didn't have any calories left in her. And I dug in I found a cookie, and it was disgusting. It was soaked with like muddy river water, but it was still a chocolate chip cookie. And I took it out. I'm like, do you want a cookie? And she breaks down. She's like, yes, I want the cookie, but I don't want to eat it. So I gave her a big hug, and I'm like, you can eat the cookie. It's all right. You'll make it. And if you get dysentery from it, whatever, right? That won't happen for like 12 hours, and we'll take care of it then. She ate the cookie, and we went on, and it was fine. We've stayed up for like 36, 48 hours, right? And people are having these breakdowns, and, you know, people would break bones, and humans have an incredible, remember what Stacey was telling about mothers walking for, you know, miles and weeks? Yeah, you would be surprised what you're capable of when asked. But when you finish the race, you might not be finished with the race. So remember I told you I did Ironman. And so Ironman is a really long race. It starts with like a 2.5 mile swim, and then you're on the bike for about 112 miles, and then you run a marathon. And then it's the end, and you cross the finish line, and everybody claps and cheers. And then what happens? Well, you kind of stagger over to the sidelines, and they give you a chocolate milk. And you sit there because your legs are rubber right now. You can't even really stand up. A lot of people puke. And so I'm just kind of dragging myself over, and I drink this chocolate milk, and I'm like, oh God, that was not a good idea. So I'm sitting there waiting, and my wife was there somewhere at the finish line, and I didn't have a way to contact her because I'm, you know, basically, you know, in a swimsuit. And so I start walking around looking for her. And I eventually found her 2 hours later. And she had my son, who was at that point like 6 months old, in the stroller, and he was just zonked out, and she was wiped out because, you know, she was up late looking for me. And we found each other. We're like, okay, great. And there's still kind of races going on. So we're like, okay, well, now let's grab the shuttle bus so we can go back to where we parked the car, which was 3 miles away. Shuttle bus wasn't running anymore. We missed it. So after I had done this incredible, right, I was just depleted. And now, like, okay, yep, I better dig deep and find a way. And so I had to push my bike, carry all my swim stuff and all the gear I had, and help her with my son to get these couple miles back to the car. We did it. It took a long time. So leave yourself some energy, because you never know, right? You get to the end and it's not the end. And last night, this reared its ugly head. It was time for bed. I was exhausted. I went out to the barn, and sure enough, we had 2 lambs come overnight. So I'm a little tired right now because I had to do that. But you know what? That's how life is. So this is the last bit of advice. And this I'm borrowing unabashedly from when I was an intern at American Airlines. We were sitting in a room, it's kind of like this, a lot smaller, 20 interns in there, and the chief pilot and like the vice president, et cetera, come in, and right, they're telling us how great it is that we're interns at this big airline. And the VP of flight operations, right? So like the top pilot in the company walks in, he's an ex-Marine. He walks in and stands right in front of us and gives us all. I mean, it looked like everybody got eye contact. We're just, you He looks through and he goes, right to everybody. And he, like he was talking to your soul. He goes, don't screw this up, and walked out. And then it was just so effective. Everybody was like, yes, sir. Because we were young, right? We were just like this, we're going to travel and have fun, but, right? He knew. You have a lot of potential here. Don't screw it up. Okay. Now it's time for questions.
So which law school did you go to, and then how did you treat that into aviation? Not necessarily a true passion, but one of your biggest passions.
So I flew airplanes, right? And then realized like, oh, the airplanes aren't there for me to fly anymore because that was the industry. So I thought I was done. So I applied to one law school here in Grand Forks because I was here. I was instructing at UND. And I was like, I just took the test. And I got a really good score, right? So I got a scholarship and I'm like, okay, I'm going. So I went to law school and I didn't touch airplanes throughout the whole thing. And they told us in our first week, they're like, you can't have a job, you can't have a life, you can't, I mean, they even like suggested we bring in our significant others and sit them down and be like, sorry, hon, this is going to be a tough 3 years because I'm not going to get to talk to you or look at you. So I thought I was just finished, right? So I was done. And right after law school, I realized like, no, I'm not sure I want to practice law. I wasn't ready to just bolt myself to a desk. So my wife and I joined the Peace Corps, which is a division of the State Department, and went off abroad. I didn't have that on the slides. And so that was a bit of international adventure, kind of like Stacey. And I came back and started practicing law, and I just opened a shop, and like anybody who walked in, I would talk to. I didn't do aviation law because I needed to, make rent and keep the lights on. And I realized very quickly practicing law that 50% of the people you talk to as a lawyer hate your guts for obvious reasons, right? And so that's kind of tough because I like people and working through problems and interesting. But as soon as somebody said, okay, well, that's fine, like now go sue someone, the fun meter went way down. So I'm like, what am I going to do about this? So my former dean called me out of the blue, here from UND, said, hey, you're a lawyer and you know aviation. Do you want to come teach aviation law? And I was like, no. And then 6 months later, I called him back and I was like, yes, I do. And I had done the research, right? I was like, why didn't I think of this? So I didn't plan that, right? I sort of kind of backed into it and I realized, oh yeah, I speak aviation and I speak law. There's like 150 of us in the United States. So we're a pretty tight bunch. We all know each other. It's a great collegiate group. I love what I do now. And I couldn't have planned it. Good question.
One quick follow-up question. What's been one of your favorite aviation law cases that you've done?
Oh man. I have to be really careful here. Yeah. So I'll say this. FAA sometimes is not our friend, right? They do great regulating us, but sometimes, right, if you get on the wrong side of the line, out comes the ruler on the knuckles. And I remember one case, I had a particularly aggressive investigator. And so I advised my client just to not play ball with him. Don't, show him exactly the minimum. And because I thought, he didn't have enough evidence. And sure enough, I got a letter a few months later saying, we don't have enough evidence. So we're going to drop the case, but don't ever do it again. It was that felt good because I knew I had helped him play the cards right. And of course, I told him like, don't ever do that again because you'll get caught. Right. Second time, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Can you share anything about the two patents that you have? Like, how are you guys?
Sure. So I'm going to really geek out here. My apologies. I know I know we're probably over time and there's a lamb waiting downstairs, so I'll make it brief. So I was doing some legal research, right, about drones. Like, can you fly drones here? Can you fly them there? Can you not do this? And so I was focusing in on what do you do about drones that are there and you don't want them there? Because I spent a few years saying like, bring drones, we need more drones. And then, oops, we have too many. So I switched, little Machiavellian scheme there. And so I'm working out like, how do we get rid of them? We don't want them, right, in certain places like over airports or national parks. And I realized like, wow, there's a hole here. Nobody's really doing this. There were a couple companies that had hardware, like big guns or basically jammers. And there were other companies that had sensors, but nobody put the two together. So that's what I did. I combined them and now. And then, of course, during COVID, things changed and I realized like, wow, you know what? I could do the same thing to sense drones where they're not supposed to be and just focus in small on little bitty COVID germs. So we did. And so I've been working on that for a while and it's a lot of fun.
All right, any other questions?
I think that was for the first one.
All right, well, if there are no further questions, let's give a round of applause to Dr. Grassley.
Thank you.
Let's go see a lamb.
Okay, so I'll go downstairs. I'll bring her right in the foyer or the entryway to this building here. So you guys can grab your, I think you have snacks, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
sure, yeah, I have snacks for her so you can feed her, pet her, and then we can chat more offline. So thanks, everybody.